That concludes our communion portion. Let's stand. We're going to sing a couple songs, have a little more worship before we have Rob Jones come up to preach the word to us from Central Jersey. Very excited about that. Cool. I will call upon the Lord, who is worthy to be praised. So shall I be saved from my enemies. I know the Lord liveth, and blessed be the rock, and let the God of my salvation be exalted. You know the Lord liveth, and blessed be the rock, and let the God of my salvation be exalted. Oh, magnify the Lord, who is worthy to be praised. So shall I be saved from my enemies. You know the Lord liveth, and blessed be the rock, and let the God of my salvation be exalted. You know the Lord liveth, and blessed be the rock, and let the God of my salvation be exalted. Let us praise the Lord of Lords. Praise Him now and evermore. Praise the Father, Son, and the Spirit. You know the Lord liveth, and blessed be the rock, and let the God of my salvation be exalted. You know the Lord liveth, and blessed be the rock, and let the God of my salvation be exalted. You know the Lord liveth, and blessed be the rock, and let the God of my salvation be exalted. You know the Lord liveth, and blessed be the rock, and let the God of my salvation be exalted. I will call upon the Lord. I will call upon the Lord. Amen.
Amen.
All right, we're going to see Jesus will fix it. One more song.
Okay, go.
Troubles come my way.
Troubles come my way.
Gotta pray sometime.
I pray sometime.
Troubles come my way.
Troubles come my way.
Gotta pray sometime.
I pray sometime.
Don't you know that my Jesus?
Jesus, He will fix
Don't
it.
you know that my Jesus?
Jesus, He will fix
Don't
it.
you know that my Jesus?
Jesus, He will fix it in a while.
Oh, in a while. Troubles come my way.
Troubles come my way.
Gotta cry
I
sometime.
cry sometime.
Troubles come my way.
Troubles come my way.
Gotta cry
I
sometime.
cry sometime.
Don't you know that my Jesus?
Jesus, He will fix
Don't
it.
you know that my Jesus?
Jesus, He will fix
Don't
it.
you know that my Jesus?
Jesus, He will fix it
in a while. Oh, Satan's on the
in a
attack.
while.
Satan's on the attack.
Satan's
Come on.
on the attack.
You know you gotta fight back.
You know you gotta fight back.
Satan's on the attack.
Satan's on the attack.
You know you gotta fight back.
You know you gotta fight back.
Don't you know that my Jesus?
Jesus, He will fix
Don't
it.
you know that my Jesus?
Jesus, He will fix
Don't
it.
you know that my Jesus?
Jesus, He will fix it
In a while.
in a while.
Sometimes I feel like giving up.
Sometimes I feel like giving up.
But I remember the cross.
I remember the cross.
Sometimes I feel like giving up.
I feel like giving up.
I remember the cross.
I remember the cross.
Don't you know that my Jesus?
Jesus, He will fix
Don't
it.
you know that my Jesus?
Jesus, He will fix
Don't
it.
you know that my Jesus?
Jesus, He will fix it
In a while, oh,
in a while.
Well, don't you know that my Jesus?
Jesus, He will fix
Don't
it.
you know that my Jesus?
Jesus, He will fix
Don't
it.
you know that my Jesus?
Jesus, He will fix it
In a while, oh,
in a while.
Amen.
Amen.
You may be seated.
Come on, Rob.
Good morning, everyone. How you
Good
doing?
morning.
So, if you could start by turning your Bibles to Romans chapter 4. Romans chapter 4. So I like this setting because I like to teach more than preach. And so the good thing is that for me, that this is more like a classroom setting. I feel comfortable. I didn't bring a PowerPoint today on purpose because I don't want you to rely on what's up there. So the bad thing about that is I want you to take notes.
Okay.
Why? So there's always homework and there's always something to study. There's always something to look at. And so just want to give you that warning up front. So for those of you that didn't enjoy school, that don't enjoy that, but hopefully after we kind of get going, I try to be a little bit more energetic because I know I throw a lot at people, and so I don't want to bore you to death. So, but I'll just kind of start by letting you know who I am. I'm Rob Jones. Been a disciple since 2000. I was baptized in Queens, New York. There I met my wife, Tiffany Jones. She's home with her mother, who's not feeling well. We visited a couple months ago. We were all together, and so a lot of you may have met us. Here's my two sons, Joshua and David.
Hey, what's up?
And so they're 11 and 9. And so, what's that? He's 9. They're 11 and 9. He wants to be 10 already. And so, yeah, I did ministry actually. So when I first got baptized, I was still working in finance at Morgan Stanley, and around September 11th, I decided I wanted to do something a little special. I lost some coworkers. I believe God didn't want me to be on the train I was supposed to be on because that train was supposed to be under Tower 2 at 8:46 a.m. And so I woke up that morning on Tuesday saying I want to go to a staff meeting because I want to do ministry. And then I was like, I don't want to lie because I had just become a disciple. I knew if I called and said I wanted to go to a staff meeting, they're going to say what? So I didn't want to make up and say I was sick. So I was like, you know what? The right thing to do was to go. But I ended up going late because I was just weighing that how do I go without lines, or how do I not go without lines? And so I ended up trying to go, and then I saw the issue. It was the A train right before the train that was going to go to the PATH train, and it got stuck. And so after that, I went into ministry and did that for 5-6 years. And the church had a couple financial problems. We had kind of had to trim the staff down. So I went back into finance, and I've been doing that for the last 12 years. And starting next year, I actually started my own company doing financial literacy education because I like to teach.
All right.
And so that's who I am. And so here I am here to talk to you about faith. And I'll tell you one thing I'm really excited about with the Short Points Church is I saw you guys from the beginning. I saw that this was a thought. This was a faithful decision. This is someone that didn't know what was going to happen, and we all got together, had prayer, had meetings, put budgets and all these things together. And then I remember that day when the elders and the evangelists were all on stage and praying for the Short Points Church to launch.
Yep.
And at that point, it was just a vision. I think you guys were still in campus at that point. Kai and Victoria were campus ministers, and I just remember them being a Rutgers group and just seeing how the church has progressed. Now you have your own logo, right? So you guys have gotten a lot more official. I hear that you have Bible talks at different campuses.
Yeah.
There's a lot of good things going on.
Talk about
And
it.
so I just want us to make sure that as we think about the progression of this church, that I don't want to come down here and just say, hey, let's just inspire the group and say some things that will hopefully get everyone going and get everyone fired up. I just want to make sure, take a step back and say maybe there's some things about faith that need to be taught.
Come on.
And some things that aren't inherent in our understanding of faith.
Yeah.
I don't think a lot of us understand God's credit system because I don't even think we understand the U.S. credit system.
Well,
Right? So we don't understand, for whatever reason, that if you spend $5,000, chances are you're going to owe $1,000.
well,
And then that $1,000 is going to add on to your bill, and then next year you're going to have $6,000, and then 25% of that will be your new bill. People don't understand that. That's why we're all entrenched in credit card debt. Or if you want to go buy a car, lease a car, maybe you get a little lower rate, so every $10,000 you borrow, $10,000, another extra $1,000 you owe. That's how the credit system works. But God has his own credit system, and that's something that I don't fully feel that we understand, and that's what I want to show you this morning.
Come on.
And we're going to look a little bit into the Old Testament and the New Testament. So
Okay.
we're going to start in Romans chapter 4. So by a show of hands, who is familiar or feels comfortable navigating the Old Testament? By a show of hands. Shaky a little bit. If you can shake it if you want. Or if you say not at all, get a couple not at alls. Okay. That's fine. So what I want to do today is I hopefully want to inspire some more study of the Old Testament. So that's when I said homework. That's why you have your pens and pencils out.
Okay.
Because hopefully some of the things that we're going to look at today, you'll realize how much of the New Testament does not make sense without an understanding of the Old Testament, and that the Old Testament builds this level of faith that is phenomenal. And so the New Testament is awesome. It has Jesus, and we see Jesus, and we see how we're supposed to behave, how we're supposed to interact. We see our salvation plan is very clear, whereas the Old Testament is a shadow. But I will say this, that the Old Testament allows character development, allows the story, the historical narrative, to show how the faith transforms somebody from beginning to end, and it does it time and time and time again. And it shows people that are incredibly flawed doing incredibly amazing things.
Right.
You see some of the worst people making the worst decisions just become these fathers and mothers of faith, and you look at that like, man, that means I can do it. And it's not the person, you realize it's God. And that's all the Old Testament says.
That's right.
And so we're going to look at some of that this morning as well.
Come
And so starting in Romans chapter 4, we're going to read verses 1 to 3. What then shall we say that Abraham, our forefather, according to the flesh, discovered in this matter? If in fact Abraham was justified by works, he had something to boast about, but not before God. What does the scripture say? Abraham believed God, and it was credited to him as righteousness. Credited as righteousness. So just hold that thought. Righteousness, you can even write this. Righteousness gets credited. Righteousness gets credited. That's God's credit system. It gets credited to you. Now to the one who works, wages are not credited as a gift, but as an obligation. However, to the one who does not work, but trusts God who justifies the ungodly, their faith is credited as righteousness. David says the same when he speaks of the blessedness of the one whom God credits righteousness apart from works. Blessed are those whose transgressions are forgiven, whose sins are covered. Blessed is the one whose sin the Lord will never count against them. So turn your Bible to Galatians chapter 5. Actually, we're going to do Galatians 3. Galatians chapter 3. And so what is this talking about here? It's talking about credit, it's talking about faith. It's a little bit confusing. Kind of makes sense, but kind of doesn't make sense. And so Paul explains it several times because he feels this is very important. So he brings it up in several of his letters. And so our main text is going to be Romans. I'm going to go back to that. But let's go to Galatians chapter 3, where he makes the same point about credit and God's credit system. You foolish Galatians. That's a great start to the system, right? If I go to teach financial literacy, you foolish people, you don't know credit. Like, that probably doesn't happen, right? But sometimes you got to hear it, right? You have to hear it in different ways. So hopefully that shut up some Galatians and they listened. But you foolish Galatians, who has bewitched you? Before your very eyes, Jesus Christ was clearly portrayed as crucified. I would like to learn the one thing from you. Do you receive the Spirit by works of the law or by believing in what you heard? Are you so foolish that after beginning by means of the Spirit, are you now trying to finish by means of the flesh? I think verse 3 captures it right there. That's God's credit system. That He does not want us to take the credit. That's the first point. God's credit system is that He does not want us to take the credit. What happens is, with us, we start something with faith. Hey, God, I'm lost. I don't know how to live a godly life. I need you. You see your darkness. You see your sin. You see that all your best decisions led to the worst outcomes. And you say, you know what? I need God. I need the cross. And you surrender yourself to God. And you become a Christian. And you try to follow a Christian. And for those who've been baptized, you said, I'm going to give my entire life and my entire will to God, because I know that God's way is way better than my way. Because my way got me into some mess. I did not feel comfortable, did not feel complete. Everything that I thought was right was wrong, and what was wrong was right. And things of that nature just made us surrender. Then we start with this great power of understanding that we need God.
Right.
And then we become like the foolish Galatians. Then it just somehow switches to where we think that we can accomplish things.
Right.
We think like, man, all I need to do is go and share my faith with 8 people, and then the Bible talk's going to get up and running, and then we're going to baptize people, and the church is going to explode. All I need to do is show up on time. All I need to do is read my Bible. All I need to do is pray a little bit more. All I need to do, and so we start thinking of these flesh works righteousness,
Right.
and we think that that's what's going to change the world.
Right.
And so we think that we want we look at God and we say, God, you gave me this amazing salvation, and we want to take credit by saying, well, I'm going to be the first one to get the Bible talk going at this school, or I'm going to be the one to share my faith with a bunch of people, or I'm going to be the one, if I have 20 quiet times, watch, God's going to bless it, or I'm going to be the one, and we come up with these, and we don't do it on purpose, but it just kind of creeps in, because that's the way that's where we're raised, that's the way our flesh is geared, that's our paradigm by which we view the world. And so we think, okay, God, you gave me a church, now I need to go in this church structure and work it. I know I saw on your list that you guys have Bible talks coming up. And I'm sure, if you're like me, the first thing you think with Bible talk is, man, darn it, I forgot to invite somebody. Who did I invite? Man, I need to do a prayer list. Okay, next month I'm going to invite somebody a little bit ahead of time. Or man, did I meet that person? Oh, and you start thinking of what do you need to do. Oh man, I need to cook food. I need to make sure there's candles in the foyer when people come in. Or I need to make sure that the iced tea is made and it's not too sweet and it's not too sharp, whatever. You have to think through all these things of gluten-free snacks and tea and coffee. And so all these things are coming through your mind when it comes to Bible talk.
Sure.
And so again, we think about, with a faithful thing about reaching the Bible, about reaching the hearts in the central, in the shore points area, we take a godly function and we turn it right into a human function.
Right.
You foolish Galatians, why would you think that all this stuff that's been done, you saw Jesus crucified, and now you think that you can tackle it with your human abilities or your human actions? But at the end of the day, the God's credit system means God credits you these supernatural, powerful abilities. But the reason we forget and forego is because we want to turn inward and look at ourselves and look at our actions and then look to others. We compare ourselves. Am I being a good disciple? Well, let's look what Kai and Victoria are doing, or let's look what the Ottos are doing, let's look what this couple's doing, that couple's doing. Okay, I'm a third year. By that person's third year, they had done this. And that's how we find our standing.
Right.
Human tradition, human activity, human behavior, because that's all we see all day. But the Bible says the righteous live by faith. And so, in God's credit system, the first point I want you to understand is, you know, how many of you have seen those commercials where it's like good credit, no credit, no problem, right? But what happens when you actually show up there? Problem. Right? You cannot go and get a car with no credit. I'm sorry. It's a great commercial. It gets people coming. I guess they're hoping that the person that drove the person there when they're sad and dejected will actually co-sign or something like that. That's probably what they're hoping will happen. But that's a real problem. People say bad credit, no problem. And so I was actually speaking to, when I started to learn this financial literacy thing, there's a gentleman that started a nonprofit that when people go into these banks with under these big banners that say no credit, no problem, and they try to get small business loans and they try to get personal loans, and they look at the sign and they believe it and they show up, and the person rejects them. The rule is that the person can't reject them in the moment, and they can't tell them reasons. And so what happens is these people go in there with all this hope, and then they leave there and are expecting, and the banker knows, because they pull up the credit, like, ooh, that's way below our threshold, so that means we're going to send a denial letter. Boom, the denial letter gets generated, the person leaves there with some hope, and they get home, and then they get a letter in the mail a couple weeks later, and that explains why they got rejected. That's a system. And so a gentleman that I work with, he started this operation where he actually goes into the banks and actually explains to people what they can do to restore their credit, so that way they don't deal with bad credit and depression.
Wow.
Because so many people are depressed, especially when these things happen over and time again. There are neighborhoods that are full of depressed people that show up and think the banking system is going to help them, and then they unfortunately just get denied again and sink into a very economic depression. And so when credit doesn't work for you, it's very depressing. But God says bad credit, no problem. Turn your Bible to Genesis chapter 15. Genesis chapter 15, verse 1. Have you ever felt spiritually that you were bankrupt? Have you ever felt that you just didn't have it? Have you ever felt like, I don't know if you guys are, I have to go to this movie. Unfortunately, that's the best reference because I'm a little older. But there's this movie when I was a kid called The Last Dragon.
Yes.
And so, The Last Dragon, you had this karate guy, and he basically, when he was getting ready to fight, he studied Bruce Lee and looked at all the Bruce Lee things, and this old ancient sensei said, you have to get the glow, and then when you get really good at karate, you'll start to glow. And he started to glow. And he was able so he just kind of got into this like real smooth rhythm, and literally his body was highlighted in yellow. And then the bad guy was trying to get the glow too, and he was red. And so you see the highlights kind of start to come, but it wasn't. He's like just really trying to get the glow, and the glow just wasn't coming, and he started getting beat up. And so sometimes we feel that way spiritually. We have that glow where we just know God's with us, and everything that we touch turns to gold, and every conversation that we have just lines up, and we just feel great about ourselves, and things happen, doors open, and it's like, man, I just have that glow, and God is with me, and I'm walking with God. But then sometimes, most of the times for a lot of us, we don't have that glow. We feel like you just get that spark, but then what happens? You still have to go about your day.
Right.
You still have to go and almost be a Christian and kind of be as much of a Christian as you can be, and you know, just barely get by, right? It's like, hey, I'm not doing great, but I'm barely getting by, or I'm just barely that snick snatch from the fire that the Bible talks about. Yeah. I'm not really kind of killing it, but I'm also not like giving up, but I'm somewhere in there, so I don't have great credit, but I have some credit. And a lot of times that's our Christianity.
Yeah.
And we look at that, and we can see in our lives that we just looking back, that there are just some times where faithful victories just kind of don't happen. And you can look, and the more faithful victories don't happen, the more we try to do it with human effort, then it gets kind of discouraging, and we realize this whole system that God set up is a very unreliable system.
Yeah.
And so, Genesis chapter 15. Now here is where the Old Testament explains